This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There is a doomsday plan proposed by a Nobel laureate, and that is that if the greenhouse effect spirals out of control, we should put rockets to shoot pollutants into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight back into outer space. That would be a doomsday mechanism to control the weather. But weather control is really for a Type 1 civilization, minimum 100 years into the future.
First of all, let me ask you this question, because there's a rumor, I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
You know, you put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore.
Geoengineering, fighting global warming by putting a chemical dust in the atmosphere and reflecting harmful radiation back into space.
We take geoengineering to mean deliberate, large-scale intervention in the Earth's system.
And of course, one of your ideas is the stratoshield, which we talked about here today. What is that?
So our stratoshield idea is an invention that is aimed at saying, what if our efforts to cut CO2 emissions through conservation, alternative energy, and so forth, are too little too late? So we came up with stratoshield as a way of saying, how could you, on an emergency basis, cool the Earth?
It sounds like crazy science fiction, but in fact it's a very serious proposal getting a lot of work. And when the scientists started to do this, a lot of players started to be attracted to them. Bill Gates, for example, he's a kind of techno-fix man. He says, well, what we need is some magic technology to get us out of this difficulty. Some of the people in the Pentagon and associated organisations are taking interest because other countries might be doing it. China, for example, they want to be ahead of the game. The right-wing think tanks, this is a really interesting one. You know, they deny climate science, but they're interested in geoengineering, and it reveals something very important about climate science denial, and that is that it's not about the science. Attacking the science is really offer them collateral damage to defend their ideology, and their ideology is the kind of thinking that likes geoengineering if it means controlling nature, if it means defending the economic and political system, if it means protecting the oil companies from a devaluation of their assets. They like that kind of solution to climate change rather than carbon taxes and restrictions on what we can consume and destroying 80% of the asset value of Exxon. So you can see politically why conservative think tanks and in private some Republican politicians are talking about geoengineering as an answer to climate change.
On leaving Microsoft, Bill Gates bought $23 million of Monsanto shares. Globally, he now promotes GMOs and a vaccines collection he calls the solution for the world. Gates has been recorded explaining this solution is actually to cut the world's population.
Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
And Bill Gates is here once again pushing the GMOs and everything else that is also reducing the population, because that's what he says. If we do a good enough job with vaccinations and everything, we'll be able to reduce the population.
A lot of money getting spent to make sure that a very substantial portion of the public stays totally confused about this. I mean, it's been really quite pernicious, but there's been literally tens of millions of dollars spent on every little thing that comes along that might, you know, relate to some uncertainty. And while
there are those who dissent, but 97% of scientists agree that global warming is man-made, and later this year we could see one of the most historic international deals signed in human history. Representatives of every country on Earth who come together in Paris and could seal a binding agreement to cut greenhouse gas emissions and limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. If they don't, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that we could see droughts, floods, rising seas, and scrambles for food right across the world.
This is the growth rate of CO2 in the atmosphere. You've seen this in various forms, but maybe you haven't seen this one. What this shows is that the rate of growth of our emissions is accelerating, and it's accelerating even faster than what we thought was the worst case just a few years back. So that red line there was something that a lot of skeptics said the environmentalists only put in the projections to make the projections look as bad as possible, that emissions would never grow as fast as that red line, but in fact they're growing faster.
Dirty energy causes dirty weather, and we have to come to our senses and do something about it.
We do not have time for a meeting anywhere of the Flat Earth Society.
We have 500 days to avoid the climate chaos. Very important issue of climate change, climate chaos, and I said that we had 500 days to avoid climate chaos.
And it's this stuff in the middle here, which is what you do if you don't stop the emissions quickly enough. It's really important to say. So a bunch of the other things that we ought to do, like slowing emissions, are intrinsically slow because it takes time to build all the hardware we need to reduce emissions. And not only that, when you cut emissions, you don't cut concentrations, because concentrations, the amount of CO2 in the air, is the sum of emissions over time. So you can't step on the brakes very quickly. But if you do this, it's quick. And there are times you might like to do something quick.
And so you actually use this metaphor of talking about
I think it's
chemotherapy.
Yeah, because chemotherapy, what is chemotherapy? Chemotherapy is taking a poison. And if you say, oh, let's research taking poison, let's be poison researchers, people say, oh, look at this terrible person. He's researching eating poison. He wants people to eat poison. Isn't he awful? But, you know, if you have cancer, you might decide that eating a poison is the right thing to do because it's going to kill off the cancer cells more than the good cells. And I look at geoengineering much the same way, that it's something we don't want to do. But I don't share Clive's confidence that we're going to reduce emissions and we're going to avoid catastrophic climate outcomes, and that we might need some measures to address the worst climate outcomes if Clive's optimism proves unfounded.
A lot of funding is being spent around the world on adapting, preparing for the worst. Okay, so that's plan A. Now what happens if that's not enough? Here's where geoengineering comes in. Plan B.
Krzywa czerwona oznacza zmiany natężenia promieniowania. Krzywa niebieska – zmiany pokrywy chmur. Promieniowanie kosmiczne wpływa zatem na klimat Ziemi. To niezwykłe. Jesteśmy bezpośrednio zależni od kosmosu. W ciągu ostatnich 100 lat natężenie pola magnetycznego Słońca wzrosło ponad dwukrotnie. Do ziemskiej atmosfery dociera mniej cząstek promieniowania kosmicznego, a to oznacza, że pokrywa chmur jest mniejsza. Dlatego klimat Ziemi się ociepla.
Ice and frost are actually the enemies of life, and for most of the Earth's life history, it has been much warmer than it is today, and CO2 was much higher than it is today. People need to study the long history of the Earth. These true believers in climate change are only looking at the last 100 years. That is a blink in nature's eye.
First, what's correct in science is not determined by consensus, but by experiment, observation, testing. I can't think of any other branch of science where an international organization is needed to determine the truth. This is the first time this has ever happened. Secondly, I don't think there is a consensus about an impending climate crisis. Like the temperance movement 100 years ago, the climate catastrophe movement has enlisted the mass media, leadership of scientific societies, trustees of charitable foundations, many other influential people to their cause. Even elementary school teachers and writers of children's books terrify our children with the idea of impending climate doom.
Another thing you might wonder about is, does it work? Can you shade some sunlight and effectively compensate for the added CO2 and produce a climate sort of back to what it was originally?
I'd love to see the international discussion on what it should be. Should it be what it was after the end of the last ice age, when it was a few degrees warmer? I said warmer than it is today. Or should it be where it was before we started to burn fossil fuel? In the Little Ice Age, when it was pretty chilly, and they wrote all those novels about how horrible it was.
And the answer seems to be yes. So here's the graphs you've seen lots of times before. That's what the world looks like under one particular climate model's view, with twice the amount of CO2 in the air. The lower graph is with twice the amount of CO2 and 1.8% less sunlight, and you're back to the original climate. And this graph from Ken Caldera, so this problem is absolutely solvable.
To increase the albedo, right? So I can turn up the albedo, make the Earth shinier. And this is called solar radiation management.
This took place about a year ago in February 2013.
So there have been a variety of schemes proposed, ranging from zany to pretty low tech. And they all have to do with getting aerosols into the stratosphere and keeping them there for years and years and years. So for example, if we used existing technology, if we used aircraft, this would be the equivalent of taking a small airline and just saying, you do nothing but spray aerosols in the stratosphere for the next in decades.
So right there, his first example of using existing technology to put these aerosols into the sky is using jet aircraft. So is it ridiculous to talk about chemtrails in the sky being part of geoengineering? Absolutely not. It's being discussed in a very serious format here in NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab about how to mitigate climate change, what to do about it.
This geoengineering idea in its simplest form is basically the following. You could put fine particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they'd reflect away sunlight and cool the planet.
It's not the first time it's been proposed. Actually, in the old communist Soviet Union, they had a state-type climatologist named Budiko who proposed that aircraft be given flares on their wingtips and that they fly low in the stratosphere, and that this would counter any possible effects of global warming.
I still get to have my CO2, and I just need to spray sulfuric acid.
Right. And each year you have to put a little more.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down.
Okay.
But as I said, it rains down.
Okay.
It's a tiny addition.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the ass?
But we put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, and that's
so
good or bad?
It's terrible.
But it'll be better if we put more in. So if it kills 1 million people and we're only doing 1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math. So killing people is not the objective here.
Killing people, not the objective. I just wanted to be clear.
And each year you have to put a little more.
We'll start this?
In practice, only a country.
Okay.
Right now, we may think of a big, rich country like the U.S. doing this.
The other question about chemtrails and whether geoengineering is being employed right now without our knowledge, I don't have any personal insight into that, other than to say that I worked in government at pretty high levels in the White House and in at state government. I'm personally skeptical of that, but obviously you never know what you don't know.
Now the new White House science advisor is talking about much more ambitious ideas. Using technology to reset the Earth's climate ourselves. Controlling our weather.
John Holdren has agreed to serve as assistant to the president for science and technology and director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I look forward to his wise counsel in the years ahead.
This gentleman by the name of, hang on one second, John Holdren, okay, he has this idea for how you could go in the atmosphere, literally into space, and alter the weather. Now, what is his plan? Let's explain that first.
The idea is if you took some missiles or whatever and spread sulfate aerosol, it's the same kind of thing that comes out of a smokestack in an uncontrolled power plant that we call pollution. See, we put this into the stratosphere, and it reflects away the sun's radiation, and it counters the effects of carbon dioxide in the lower atmosphere causing global warming. So you counter the global warming. It's not the first time it's been proposed. Actually, in the old communist Soviet Union, they had a state-type climatologist named Budiko who proposed that aircraft be given flares on their wingtips and that they fly low in the stratosphere, and that this would counter any possible effects of global warming.
He's a radical environmentalist, an ecological fanatic, a green kook, a wacko, except that it's also very sinister because the implications of his belief structure and his world outlook are genocide. Holdren says that the optimum world population is 1 billion. Now let's pause. At the time Holdren wrote that, the world population was already 4 billion. Today, if you say the optimum population is 1 billion, it would mean that more than 5 billion would have to go. And again, these are orders of magnitude that Hitler, Stalin, and Mao never dreamed of. Only in the mind of fanatics like Holdren do we get genocide of these proportions.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it.
Climate change will impact every country on the planet. No nation is immune. So I'm here today to say that climate change constitutes a serious threat to global security, an immediate risk to our national security. And make no mistake, it will impact how our military defends our country. And so we need to act, and we need to act now.
It's crucial to distinguish these two completely different kinds of things. Carbon removal is inherently expensive. We can disagree about exactly how much, but it's expensive. Putting sulfates in the aerosol is potentially so cheap that costs are irrelevant, in the same sense as when you think about security strategy, that actual cost of nuclear warheads is not a big driver in security strategy. So I'm working with one of the leading contractors of high-altitude aircraft in the U.S., Aurora Flight Sciences. We're in the middle of a contract they have with us looking at the costs of doing this, and the costs are, as we thought, small. These costs.
Would you add it to the fuel, or would it?
No, that doesn't work at all. That's in the blogosphere. No, you build custom aircraft that would fly at about 75,000 feet. That would put the appropriate sulfur, whatever it is, in the atmosphere, and the costs of doing that really work out to be low enough that costs don't matter.
I think it's almost certain that we will eventually think of cleverer things to do than just putting sulfur in. There might be some good reasons to think about alumina. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of alumina in the stratosphere. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric rate of forcing for small particles as does sulfur. And that means you have 4 times less surface area for the same rate of forcing. And this is a much bigger deal. You have roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate, and that's the thing that really drives removal. So you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass fluxes. Turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of alumina in the stratosphere because it's in shuttle exhaust. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle possible to do that. There's a big literature that's already looked at that. We've been doing a little work on delivery. There's a study that an aircraft engineering firm called Aurora Flight Sciences is doing, and all the results of that study will be completely public. There's nothing proprietary about this. We're going to be inviting people in for a mid-study meeting soon. And they've been looking at a bunch of different delivery options, but the bottom line is that it seems pretty cost-effective and easy to do this with aircraft that are not very different from conventional aircraft.
You have said sulfates are ineffective they scatter the wrong direction, and you proposed the aluminum discs, which are like 15 nanometers across and photophoretic, and
I showed,
You've read Dr. Keith's paper, The Photophoretic Levitation of Particles, the 2010 one. In that, it says that the sulfates are actually ineffective, and he says instead you should be using nanoparticulate aluminum and barium.
You're quoting it correctly, but anyway,
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration.
And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. And it's not even close to being an issue.
To clarify, so 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere will have no human health impact.
But if you have thousands upon thousands of planes spraying this material in different regions around the world, all at the same time, you can just imagine the amount of chaos that this will throw into the weather system for the entire planet. Now, the other side of this, of course, is the toxicology, the toxic effects that these materials have. Now, if this ball right here was a red blood cell, something you can't even see without a microscope, you could line 50 of these particles up next to a single red blood cell. That's how tiny they are. They can be absorbed right through the skin, and of course, there's almost no filtration system that you can wear that will prevent these things from being introduced into your body during respiration. It was an Air Force study, a United States Air Force study that was conducted between 1993 and 2001. It was called In Vitro Toxicity of aluminum nanoparticles in rat alveolar macrophages. Sounds real technical, but all it says is aluminum nanoparticles have a toxic effect on the white blood cells, part of your immune system that exists right in your lungs, in the alveoli, the little air sacs that expand and contract when you breathe. Okay, this is your first line of defense against infection. So if you are able to suppress the activity of the immune system in the lungs, it means that anything else you put into the air, it'll go right into your system without your being able to defend against it. This is why it is so serious.
Alumina, we've only begun to research and published nothing.
No, you can't filter it out of water either. There's no way to get 1/1000th of a meter particle out of there. By the way, smoke, cigarette smoke is 1/1,000,000th of a meter, and we're dealing with something that's 1,000 times smaller than a particle of tobacco smoke.
Talking about seeding the atmosphere with various substances, and we're not clear on what impact they could have on people's health.
Aluminum, for instance.
Is aluminum one of those?
Aluminum's not, I don't know anybody who's done any research.
David Keith in San Diego talked about it. Are you kidding me?
Nobody, no. I mean, you guys think you know, but nobody that I know about has seen anything that is remotely real.
So how would you explain the increase in aluminum and barium in blood, rainwater across the world, Alzheimer's and lung pulmonary failure being number 3?
So show me data.
Chemtrails now getting widespread attention.
KSLA News 12 had the sample tested at a lab. The results? A high level of barium, 6.8 parts per million, more than 3 times the toxic level set by the EPA.
Armed with these lab results about the high levels of barium found in our sample, we decided to contact the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. They told us that yes, these levels are very unusual.
Barium is a hallmark of other chemtrail testing. But those who fear chemtrails could be secret biological or chemical testing on the public point to the 1977 Senate hearings in particular, which confirmed 239 populated areas had been contaminated with biological agents between 1949 and 1969.
The high levels of barium linked to those alleged chemtrails, we wanted to find out exactly what effects barium has on the body. We spoke with Mark Ryan, the director of the Poison Control Center. Ryan tells KSLA News 12 that long-term exposure causes blood pressure problems. Ryan addressed concerns by chemtrail researchers that barium could be meant to wear down a person's immune system.
Anything that causes ill effects in the body long-term, chronically, is going to affect your ability because it's constantly working on the body. So from that aspect, yeah, that's a potential.
You want some figures? Okay, latest water test. Tested the rain. 13,100 micrograms per liter of aluminum in the rain in 2013. Normally, it should be 0. So 13,100 is pretty damn much, folks. It used to be 0. Then it was 100s in the 2000s. And then since 2010, it's into the 1,000s and the latest 13,100. In the snow on Mount Shasta, pristine Mount Shasta, 61,000 micrograms per liter, 4 times the amount that is found in the soil up there. Where in the hell is this stuff coming from if it's not coming from the soil?
When you lose all your stream organisms, when you have aluminum overload in your streams, you're killing your microbial bacteria and you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So it goes way beyond just a little bit of pollution.
The contrails, not the chemical, the contrails occur because of cold air, minus 30. It takes a high altitude, around 30,000 feet plus. There's carbon dioxide and water vapor in that exhaust. That turns to ice crystals, and that's what you see, the white stream behind it. Those white crystals of ice warm up, dissolve, and the smoke goes away. And it never lasts more than a minute.
I don't think there's anybody that has looked at the sky with a bit of brains and thought and fairness that could argue that something isn't happening that wasn't happening before. Contrails were something that followed a trail, condensation trails from an airplane, that were narrow and dissipated very quickly. Chemtrails go from horizon to horizon, and they spread, and they crisscross, and they go next to one another, and pretty soon the whole sky is cloudy.
We know now that these are not clouds in any conventional sense. They are indeed a unique and artificial creation that now crosses new thresholds in the atmospheric and geophysical sciences. There is one way that such a transformation can be made, and that is with the introduction of vast quantities of an extremely small, water-loving metallic salt at flight altitude. This transformation cannot be achieved with water vapor alone, and the emissions under examination are indeed not water vapor. They are solid, and they are well entrenched into your air supply. These important conclusions are at the very heart of the aerosol operations that are being disclosed here. HEPA, or high-efficiency particulate air filters, have been used in various states to directly filter the outdoor air in repeated tests. Some of the materials found include the repeated presence of unusual filaments, a gel formation, crystals, and powders. Extraordinary levels of particulate materials have been directly observed and recorded using simple methods discovered by citizens across the country. These methods include the corona of the sun and extremely powerful lamps. Caution with the solar method is especially advised. These observations have been taken under the most ideal weather and air quality conditions, and they nevertheless provide alarming and direct evidence of the substantial changes that have occurred in our atmosphere. Rainwater samples have been distilled to concentrate any solid materials or particulates. Metallic-based materials are evident upon observation. Unusual airborne filament samples have been collected from a variety of locations across the nation, as well as the globe. These fibers are highly unusual in their properties, and any claims of being simply spider webs cannot be substantiated. Samples of these fibers have been sent directly to the Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Subsequent observation of these fibers under the microscope produces disturbing results, including the occurrence of unusual biological components. The United States EPA has refused to identify these fibers. A variety of electromagnetic devices have been developed and used. This investigation has resulted from the plausible hypothesis that the atmosphere has now been modified into what is called a plasma state, or an electrified gas. Testing has produced a variety of indications that this hypothesis is indeed correct, and that the atmosphere is regularly being used for electromagnetic applications. ELF energy is of special concern because of its direct connection to the health aspects of the electromagnetic nature of human beings. Artificial pulse energy appears to now have been detected on a variety of occasions, and evidence indicates that it is now a part of our unseen environment. Electrolysis methods have further confirmed the existence of unexpected ionizing metallic salts within our atmosphere. Radar anomalies also continue to point to the presence of an altered electromagnetic environment.
If you are familiar with OSHA, if any of you work in a blue-collar job, you know about the Occupational Safety and Hazards Administration. Look up the Material Data Safety Sheet for aluminum oxide nanoparticles. It says very clearly on that sheet, should never be distributed into the environment without the proper government permits.
My job in the U.S. Air Force was working in bioenvironmental engineering. So what bioenvironmental engineering is in the Air Force is equivalent to that of the OSHA and the EPA, if you're familiar with that. So we were an embedded liaison to make sure that we were tracking all of the aspects and impacts of the military, meaning what is the military doing and how is it impacting the environment, because we were accountable for that. One day I was going through that computer system, which if you want to look it up, it's called an Air Force Form 3952. It is the approval of hazardous materials. I was finding tons and tons of large quantities of aluminum, barium, strontium in the forms of oxides and sulfates. And of course I knew that there's industrial processes you may not have heard of, but it's bead blasting, pneumatic sanding, shot peening. There is certain medias that's similar to that is used. However, I had already accounted for that. So I started asking questions. And at that point, my demonization began. You know, I made my rank. I was decorated. I was a non-commissioned officer of the quarter. I won lots of awards. I had no reason for anyone to attempt to demonize me. So then I get moved over to the other Air Logistics Center. There's only 2 in the Air Force, which is in Warner Robins, Georgia. This kind of carried with me, and I thought, you know what? Should I revisit this? Is it worth it? Did I hit something? Maybe it's need to know. I started finding the same things at Robins Air Force Base. I was now doing some more investigation work. Part of what I did was to use a high volume air sampler to air sample up to, I'd say, a football field in about 10 minutes. I also conducted soil sampling because I thought, you know, if this is real and they are spraying this, it's gonna get to the ground. So I conducted air sampling, I conducted soil sampling, and I was getting high levels of these contaminants. When I started asking the question again under a new commander, I never in my life thought I would have somebody look me in the face and tell me, I am questioning you. Is there something wrong with you? You've been looking really depressed lately. You know I can put you under a mental evaluation for up to 120 days. Who would take care of your daughter? Because I was divorced at the time. As soon as I heard that, I knew. It validated everything I ever thought. And I thought, I've spent 9 years of my life trying to protect human health, and here we are violating law after law after law. Just sitting here, instead of protecting the people, we are poisoning the people.
And now we must take a different turn, a turn to explore an unusual world that now surrounds us, and yet a world that many of us remain unaware of. The atmosphere of this planet has been changed, and you are now being introduced to one of the main causes of that change. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen is leaving a normal contrail, and it vanishes as any trail of water vapor is expected to. But beneath it you see an aircraft emission that is stationary, thick, continuous, and persistent, and it must eventually be concluded that it is not primarily water vapor.
The particular practice of putting nanoparticles or nanometal particles in jet fuel, there was actually a NASA study that was done, released in May of 2001. Yes, there we go, right there. It's entitled Nanotechnology and Gelled Cryogenic Fuels. Now, the study goes into a lot of different areas, everything from rocket propulsion to regular turbojet engines, the kind you see on airliners, including the proposal to include jet fuel A and JP8, which are fuels that you find in jet airliners and military aircraft. The idea is that if you have oxide-coated aluminum, that is 2 atoms of aluminum and 3 atoms of oxygen, when it's consumed in the combustion reaction, it releases all that oxygen and it produces a much more efficient combustion. Of course, the aluminum metal comes out the exhaust pipe afterwards, and it winds up being in part of the trail. The trick is that you're essentially containing an oxygen supply in the fuel itself, which means you can go to much higher altitudes where there's not that much oxygen. It gives you an advantage militarily, it gives you an advantage as a commercial carrier because you can go much further on less fuel. The problem is, eventually it comes down as fallout that we breathe.
Chemtrails sind Chemikalien in der Atmosphäre. Sie werden absichtlich von hochfliegenden Tankflugzeugen der Luftwaffe versprüht.
Will Thomas hat ein Buch über Chemtrails geschrieben. Seit den späten 1990er Jahren untersucht er die seltsamen Muster am Himmel.
Ein Repräsentant aus höchsten Regierungskreisen, den wir Deep Sky nennen, hat uns die Wahrheit über Chemtrails bescheinigt. Kommerzielle Flüge werden so umgeleitet, dass sie neben Tankflugzeugen der Luftwaffe fliegen. Diese stoßen dann die Chemtrails aus.
Bereits 2005 waren den Meteorologen erstmals solche merkwürdigen Geisterwolken aufgefallen.
Wir dachten erst, das ist ein Regengebiet, aber keine Wolken im Satellitenbild, das kann doch nicht sein. Also ein Regengebiet ohne Wolken.
Wolken, die nur auf den Radarbildern existieren. Als das Phänomen wieder auftauchte, gingen Brandt und seine Mitarbeiter an die Öffentlichkeit.
Daraufhin beschäftigte das Rätsel eine ganze Wissenschaftlergruppe vom DLR, Forschungszentrum Karlsruhe, der Universitäten Bonn und Hamburg. Ihr abschließendes Urteil, es musste sich um Düppel oder auch Chef genannt handeln, eine militärisch genutzte Substanz zur Radartäuschung.
Es waren Wolken auf dem Radar, die künstlich erzeugt wurden durch militärische Emissionen von Partikeln, von Düppeln auf dem Radarfeld über Norddeutschland.
Wurden bereits im Zweiten Weltkrieg entwickelt. Bestanden sie damals aus Staniolstreifen, so sind es heute mit Aluminium bedampfte Glasfasern mit einer Länge von 15 bis 25 mm und einem Durchmesser von ca. 100 Mikrometer. Sind die Fäden halb so groß wie die Wellenlänge des Radars, kommt es zu Falschechos. Im Februar 2008 macht Eberhard Koschella auf seiner Pferdekoppel bei Kaiserslautern eine merkwürdige Entdeckung. Er findet auf dem Gelände große Mengen Glänzen. Für Jung war gleich klar, dass es sich um Düppel handelte.
Die Düppel lagen damals nicht nur auf der Pferdekoppel, wir haben sie überall im Wald gefunden, sie lagen auf Waldwegen, sie lagen auch im Ort, und zwar auf einem Kinderspielplatz, sogar im Sandkanal.
Das Luftwaffenamt erklärte, seit 1998 ist das Ausbringen von Düppeln über deutschem Hoheitsgebiet verboten. Über See nur erlaubt, wenn keine Inseln im Niedergangsgebiet liegen. Im Sonderfall durch Anweisung höherer Kommandostellen dürfen Düppel nur über Manövergelände ausgebracht werden.
Ich vermute, dass hier also die US-Streitkräfte regelmäßig Düppel über den Pfälzerwald ausbringen, weil ein Meteorologe aus Karlsruhe hat mir erzählt, dass er mindestens zweimal im Monat Radarechos hat, die er sich nicht erklären kann.
Was das genau für ein Zeug ist, das da immer wieder mal vom Himmel fällt, erklärte die deutsche Luftwaffe, dass Düppel harmlose Glasfasern sind, die man mit dem Hausmüll entsorgen kann. Wenn Düppel tatsächlich so harmlos sind, warum müssen dann Luftwaffenangehörige Atemmasken tragen, wenn sie damit zu tun haben?
Wir wollen bei der Bundesanstalt für Materialforschung und Prüfung eine Analyse durchführen lassen. Doch als man dort hört, worum es sich handelt, möchte man mit der Sache nichts zu tun haben. Wir fordern die Bundeswehrstudien an. Nach einigen Wochen Wartens dürfen wir sie einsehen, allerdings weder zitieren noch Wissenschaftlern zur Beurteilung überlassen. Zitat: Eine Weitergabe ist, wie bereits telefonisch mit Ihnen erörtert, aus nutzungsrechtlichen Gründen leider nicht gestattet. In einer amerikanischen Studie neueren Datums ist zu lesen, die Frage bleibt offen, ob die Fasern während des Ausstoßens oder durch Verwitterung zu lungengängigen Partikeln zerbrechen können. Es gibt keine Daten bezüglich der Effekte von solchen Faserpartikeln auf Lungenflügelgewebe. Was Mineralfasern so gefährlich macht, ist die hohe biologische Stabilität. Da die Düppel noch nie von unabhängigen, das heißt zivilen Instituten untersucht wurden, wenden wir uns an das Institut für analytische Chemie der TU Berlin. Hier hat man kein Problem, das Material zu analysieren.
Die Analyse des Materials mittels der Röntgenfluoreszenzanalyse hat ergeben, dass die Hauptbestandteile Aluminium und Silizium sind, neben Calcium, Magnesium und Bohr. Es scheint sich also um ein normales Glasmaterial zu handeln. Wir haben jetzt mittels anderer Methoden noch den Gesamtgehalt an metallischem Aluminium versucht zu bestimmen und sind darauf gekommen, dass es sich um 60% Aluminium und ungefähr 40% Glas handelt.
Auffällig ist der hohe Aluminiumanteil, der laut veröffentlichten Angaben viel geringer hätte ausfallen müssen. Offiziell wird die Harmlosigkeit von Düppel damit begründet, dass Aluminium häufig in der Erdkruste vorkommt. Allerdings reines Aluminium gibt es in der Natur nicht. Ob Nanopartikel reinen Aluminiums, wie bei anderen Elementen bekannt, schädlich sein können, welche Auswirkungen sie auf Organismus und Umwelt haben, behandeln die vorliegenden Studien nicht. Das Material ist äußerst spröde. Können also zerbrechende Düppel gesundheitsgefährdende Feinstäube bilden? Hans-Jürgen Hoffmann vom Institut für Werkstoffwissenschaften der TU Berlin ist Spezialist für Glaswerkstoffe. Ihm legen wir die Ergebnisse der Analyse vor. Kann man das Düppelmaterial mit Glaswolle vergleichen?
Wenn man die Fasern vergleichen will mit bekannter Glaswolle, dann kann man wirklich sagen, es ist ähnlich, aber es kommt hinzu, dass diese Fasern noch mit Aluminium beschichtet sind.
Es handelt sich um sogenanntes E-Glas, eine billige Glasvariante. Messungen ergeben, ihre Stärke beträgt nicht wie offiziell erklärt 100 Mikrometer, sondern nur 25 Mikrometer, also wesentlich geringer.
Genaue Zahlen, wie viele Tonnen Düppel über Deutschland jährlich verstreut werden, gibt es offiziell nicht. Aber uns liegen immerhin Zahlen für ein Bundesland vor. Allein beim jährlichen NATO-Manöver Elite werden über Baden-Württemberg rund 2,5 Tonnen.
And the real reason for stratospheric aerosol geoengineering that some people in this town are calling chemtrails, they have been going on since 1997, and they continue to go on. They were mentioned by name in House Resolution 2977. Dennis Kucinich called them chemtrails. He also called them an exotic weapon. They weren't a savior to global warming. They called it an exotic weapon. And at the time, he knew what he was talking about because he was head of the committee. The bill did not say artificial clouds are mitigation against global warming. He said that the chemtrails are in fact weaponized, a weapon, a space weapon. What is an exotic weapon? During the Vietnam War, we saw aerosols of Agent Orange used as exotic weapons in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos.
In 1962, American forces responded with Operation Ranch Hand. Over the next 9 years, spraying an area about the size of Massachusetts with defoliants, the most notorious being Agent Orange.
Enough food to feed 600,000 people for a year has been destroyed.
Despite this sudden devastation, U.S. officials said the spraying created no lasting harm.
We're being sprayed now by U.S. military aircraft. Agent Orange. Knowing that the result could cause death and horrible birth defects, the Pentagon continued to order the spraying over 4 countries to decimate the population, to starve them. An American Holocaust, the Vietnam War. Watch that, particularly the segment having to do with spraying of dioxins, Agent Orange, over 4 countries in Vietnam. Then think about the stratospheric aerosol geoengineering that you're breathing as you leave this building.
Back when you're at Lawrence and Livermore, you're on record as proposing putting pathogens into clouds to reign over enemy territory.
That's not true.
I have audio.
Show me it. Show me it.
I can play it to you. I got it on my iPhone.
Okay. I used to work at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and I once participated in a meeting where we all sat around the room and thought about how could we manipulate geophysical systems to use it as a weapon. The meeting was about weaponizing geophysical interventions. That means, could you somehow interfere in Earth functioning in a way that you could use it as a military weapon? Could you change climate? What could you do in terms of manipulating the sort of Earth's physical systems as a weapon? Well, some of the ideas were okay. Maybe we could blow up hydrogen bombs. underwater offshore and make a tidal wave that would go over a city. And the result was, well, isn't it easier just to drop the hydrogen bombs on the city? Now you could imagine, though, say putting pathogens in a cloud. Let the cloud, go over somewhere and then would rain down on your enemy and create, do chemical or term warfare in this kind of way. And that might work against something that we say is big as the former Soviet Union, where, you could be pretty sure that within a few days that cloud would rain out. Yeah, this is true.